Okay, I'll be honest with you. I've been sat here trying to figure out how to start this for something like an hour. I've tried about 15 different ways, and my favourite so far has been, "Hey kids, want to hear a spooky story?" Yeah, I'm not exactly the most seasoned of storytellers. I'm not all that smart either, and I'll tell you why. I was 20, and I'd just flunked out of university. Flunked it like a falcon taking a nosedive through a helicopter's blades. But I wasn't about to tell my parents that. Instead, I elected to keep up the lie until I was supposed to graduate, and then maybe I'd fake my death or something. The only flaw to this plan was that I needed money. I needed money bad. Ever since I realized my degree was taking a turn, I'd been frugal with my cash, but all I had by the end were 3 months of rent if I was careful. I applied to job after job. The only offer I got was from a guy literally calling himself Greasy Benny, who wanted me to run around the neighborhood catching stray dogs and dropping them in the alley behind his house. I went off it when I saw, quote, "people who would be good for this job. Someone who doesn't ask questions." After 2 months of hunting and counting my change, I was running out of the core ingredients for my gourmet creation, the ketchup sandwich. One night I was on Amazon and started browsing for bubblegum machines under £5 so I could start throwing children's parties. Despite my best efforts, it felt like I was drowning. And then a lifesaver came in the form of an unsolicited 2:30 a.m. email. The place was called The Starling, a theatre that lay somewhere out in the woods. I never sent them any kind of application. I didn't know the place even existed. I checked all the job agencies I'd signed on to, but not one listed this place. Even a cursory Google search yielded no results. The position they offered me was in hospitality, working the bar, waiting in the restaurant, and serving food. Simple. Well, despite the red flags, I took the interview. It was weird because the whole thing was over the phone. They didn't really give me a time. So there I am, sat at home as usual when it rings and I pick up. "What's your previous experience? Why would you be good for this position? How do you overcome challenges? What scares you the most? What's the most you've ever hurt someone? Have you ever been afraid you might disappear? Would anybody miss you?" I could hear their breath struggle up their throat to rattle over the receiver grill, and the sound of lips colliding with tongue on every word. I did my best to answer honestly every question. When he asked the last one, I had to pause, half in shock and half in consideration. Would anybody miss me? I had no reason to even humour such a weird inquiry, but for whatever reason, I told them the honest truth. Probably not. Click. Confusingly, the line went dead, just like that. But I didn't have to wait long to hear back, because next I checked my emails. There it was, ominously waiting for me. The instructions offered assembled to little more than a crude scavenger hunt that would almost undoubtedly end in my horrible demise at the end of a murderous cultist. The instructions offered assembled to little more than a crude scavenger hunt that would almost undoubtedly end with my horrible demise at the hand of murderous cultists, hell-bent on reviving some eldritch abomination with low standards in its sacrifices. I decided that I was kind of fine with that, and so, one Thursday afternoon, in the wintry depths of December, I eagerly journeyed into the woods. A journey from which I, unknowing at the time, would never return. And so, I followed the western footpath up to the old oak tree, took a left and walked straight until I hit the gravestones that markings had long since rubbed off, followed the crook until it dipped away into the dirt, and followed the dilapidated fence to the gate labelled, quote, the Starling. Enter on formal invite only. And under that, in smaller letters, trespassers cannot be accounted for. Treading through the thick brush without even a hint of a path, I found myself outside the doors of a very real and surprisingly well kept, considering it sat in the middle of nowhere, theatre. Considering all that, I suppose the events that followed can only be called my fault. I found myself waking up this morning, looking around me at the walls coated in crisscrossed scratches and the occasional claw mark, and thinking, how the hell did I end up here? To save us some time, I'll start from the beginning of the end. I'd been working at the Starling for 1 year and 9 months, ignoring my hiatus, which I'll explain when I've got more time. I'd met so many fresh, perplexed starters in my time that I worked out my introductory spiel to a T. If you're going to work here, there's a few things you should know. First, you can't leave. I know the wide open double doors out in the lobby look terribly inviting, but trust me, it ain't worth it. Secondly, while we're in the subject of places not to go, the 3rd floor is out of bounds. That's where head office is located. I don't know what's up there. Sam, the hospitality manager, doesn't know what's up there, and whatever the milky red substance that reeks of raw steak with a strange hint of barbecue sauce that occasionally leaks through the ceiling panels is, it's best left ignored. Just jam a bucket down and pretend you didn't see it. Once the doors have opened and the customers start coming in 2.5 hours before the night's performance, you don't come out from behind the bar. Sure, you can head into the kitchen, sit in the keg store, or play a round of squash in the keg store for all I care, but you don't go out into the foyer, no matter how much one of them tries to convince you. When you first see a customer, don't scream or throw anything. I know that it's weird how they don't have faces, but you get used to it. Just serve them like you would any regular person with a face, and try to upsell some nuts if you can. They're starting to go stale. If you smoke, there's a machine in the green room and a smoking area outside fire exit 8. The boundaries of it are clearly marked. Don't stick so much as a finger outside, unless you want to keep it. On the subject of fire exits, in the event of a fire, call stage door on 356 and then quietly wait to be burned alive because we can't escape. While the shows are in progress, get to restocking the upstairs and downstairs bar while clearing the foyers. And for the love of God, don't try and sneak a look into the auditorium. Well, that's probably about all for the major stuff. Do you know how to use a coffee machine? I mean, at different points there were little amendments added and rescinded. Don't look at the mirror in dressing room B. If you see that spider thing near the coffee beans, please catch the bugger. We've had to place 3 orders just this week. But otherwise, that's the stuff that stayed pretty consistent. Let's say it's a pretty normal night, and you found yourself one of the unfortunate newbies. At the time, you'd likely have found one of the handful of bartenders standing with you on the front lines. Perhaps Ash would shoot you a cocky smile as he watched you fight with the cider line, trying your very best to figure out if the piece of crap fast pour taps work better when you hold the cup at an angle or flat against the bottom of the glass as directed. It's possible Lily would be bouncing back and forth from one customer to another with all the enthusiasm of an old bar rag dropped behind the fridge a millennia ago. You might even have been unfortunate enough to be in the bar with Lucas, who would likely be asking you taxing questions on the fabric of reality or how dirty a piece of cutlery would have to be before you clean it. Either way, you'd likely be on the bar with one of the team leaders, which would refer to Connie or I. Likelihood is, you'd ask us the same questions every newbie does. First being, why don't we just close the bar and not serve at all? And I tell you to shut up and to do your job. You be kind, courteous, and no matter what, you do not, for the love of God, stop serving. No matter what Sam and I are screaming at the top of our lungs. Doesn't matter if a griffin leaps over the bar and begins a sparring match with one of your fellow bartenders. You keep serving. because things, as they only ever do in this place, get worse if you stop serving. Things always get worse. And depending on when you started, you might have been unlucky enough to be there when Mikey from Tech ran into our kitchen screaming bloody murder and begging for help while clutching wildly at his pant leg. You'd, of course, keep serving. You always keep serving. But if you weren't, you might have caught Kanye and I rapidly trying to bandage the lower calf that refused to stop simply swelling and swelling until it roughly resembled a watermelon the colour of raw steak. That is, until it violently exploded, showering the room and its occupants with grisly viscera. As I came out of shock, I roughly remember seeing Connie desperately bandaging little more than bone as the floor pooled with what had, until moments ago, occupied Mikey's veins. You'd have watched as we each came to the same slow and simultaneous conclusion. We were all quiet, serving on the bar for the rest of the night. Still don't know what caused that. And then we'd be closing down for the night, wiping down the tables, when you'd spot something outside amongst the rusting cars that never move, some upturned or with windows smashed. You'd spot something just outside of where the light reaches, and you'd ask yourself what it is. And I'd take my flashlight and point it out into the dark to see one of my old friends or acquaintances, their skin pallid and eyes staring into the light of our foyer. And I would tell you, that's why you don't go outside. Then we'd just finish shutting the bar shutters, and they'd stand out amongst the wrecks, just twitching and undulating, as they do. And when we reached the end of the night, I'd write a few bottles of spirits onto the wastage record, maybe a few wines or perhaps a barrel of lager, and drag it down to the hall. Sometimes we use the place for overflow when we've got too many casts for the dressing rooms, but mostly it's one of the only places of respite we have. Amongst the tables and chairs will likely be tech staff, some box office, and almost certainly me. All of us getting comfortably mashed before calling it a night. And I'll be the last man standing. Always am. Or sitting, sometimes crawling. Last one though. And if you were to be a newbie around this time, you'd have been privy to it all. You'd have been able to watch everything get slowly worse, as it always does. Piece of advice. If you ever get a job offer at some weird place out in the woods, regardless of how desperate you are, don't take it. It's not worth the hassle.